So after Snow White, 3 years later they made Pinocchio, which, like Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, I think Pinocchio is still one of the best Disney movies out there. Like, in the canon, it's definitely one of the best. Now, Pinocchio, I love as much as Snow White. I think it's still a fantastic it's a fantastic second film to make. Um, it, 3 years later, after Snow White came out, and the thing I love about Pinocchio is, like Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, this has such likable characters. Again, like, it is so crazy in how likable these characters are, and still, with their personalities, they still make this movie timeless in terms of the characters and the story. It doesn't do anything like Snow White, or like this and Snow White, either one, they do not do anything to make it uh, dated. Like, it is legitimately timeless, both of these movies. And I think that this does a great job, like I said, with characters. The characters are so interesting in this movie, like the last one. Pinocchio, I think, is such a likable character. He's such a. He's got such a naivete about him, but that makes him so likable because he gets into all this trouble, but you want him to succeed. You want him to make it through. And he goes through a lot of dark shit in this movie. And I love how his owner Geppetto, who's just caring for him, wants to find him because he loses him, of course. And Jiminy Cricket, who is an iconic Disney character that is seen everywhere all the time in Disney, anywhere. And I love all the other side characters like Figaro and Cleo. They're so funny. The cat and the fish. They are hilarious in how they don't even speak, but they've got so much personality to them. For example, I think Figaro's the cat. Figaro, and whenever Figaro and Cleo, whenever there's a look that they give to Geppetto when he says something, and they just go, and it's so funny because they don't even speak, but they've got such a it's the way they're drawn. They've got such an emotion to them, and even though they don't speak, they're so memorable. Like, they're funny. The way that they make reactions like that, or how they just react to each other. I think that they're fun, really fun side characters. And speaking of other characters, all the villains in this movie, there's a lot of villains. Like, it's surprising how many there are in this hour and a half movie. Um, because you start with the two creatures, the fox and the cat, who go and get Pinocchio to go to Stromboli, who is the guy who runs the puppet show. And they're both. I like how conniving they are, and they're not creepy, but they're just dumb conniving, the cat and the fox. But I think they're really fun too. They're fun characters, and Stromboli is pretty scary. He's not the scariest, um, but Stromboli, I like how he takes Pinocchio and deceives him. And of course, the story in Pinocchio is like he gets deceived all the time. He's supposed to not tell lies or not do anything bad, but he keeps getting tempted by all of these bad things happening around him. And Stromboli, I think, is really scary. Like, he's a dumb, fat-looking dude, but like he gives off like this to the audience. He gives off this fearful way he talks to Pinocchio whenever he takes him in. And I love how whenever Pinocchio says, "I'm gonna go home I'm gonna go tell my father," because he gave him like a thing that looks like a coin, even though it wasn't a coin. Gave it to Pinocchio, and Pinocchio says he's gonna go home to his father. And Stromboli laughs with him, and they both laugh together, and it's really creepy where they're laughing, and Stromboli is holding him like a baby, and then throws him in a cage, and says, "If you don't behave, I'm gonna turn you into firewood." And he throws an axe literally at this puppet on the ground, right in its chest, just like impales this puppet that's not animate, but that was really creepy, and that is effective whenever he leaves Pinocchio in the cage and he says, "You're staying with me." And I like how Pinocchio escapes, but it is legitimately scary whenever Stromboli, the way he deceives him and the way he talks, Pinocchio into this, and the way that he traps him by giving him a false sense of security, and since Pinocchio is naive, he's supposed to be. It works really well in how creepy that guy is, and I don't remember what the exact name of it is, but the villain guy who runs the Prankster's Paradise, he is legitimately he's a really scary villain. He's fantastic. Um, I I'm blanking on the name, but he's the other villain in the movie, the one who takes all the boys to that island, Pleasure Island, and where they turn into donkeys. And that guy is the scariest one out of all of them. And I think that the way that he talks, whenever he is talking to the fox and the cat about how we're gonna take all these kids to Pleasure Island and they don't come back as boys, and the animation whenever he says as boys, and like his teeth get all big and his face gets all red, and it's really scary. It actually really, just because of the beautiful animation, it works really well and how intimidating this guy is. And he is the scariest villain in the movie because unlike most Disney movies, this is one of the darkest Disney movies because of this villain and because of what he does, and because we get no resolution with this villain either. We don't actually see him get thwarted. Pinocchio just escapes. But this villain takes all these kids to this island where they can behave bad all they want. All the bad kids just do anything they want. Smoke, drink, destroy property on this island. And then they all turn to donkeys. And it is pretty creepy whenever Lampwick becomes a donkey, like when he was with Pinocchio. But then whenever they all become donkeys and Pinocchio escapes, Jiminy sees before this that the guy who took all the kids here is trapping them in cages when they've turned to donkeys. And there's one really horrifying thing where the guy says to a donkey that can still talk, like human talk, he says, "And what's your name?" And the kid just says, "Alexander," and he starts crying. And then he goes, "So you can talk?" And he says, "Yes, sir, I want to go home to my mama." And then then he says, "He can still talk. Put him in the cage." And then you see, or in this gate, and you see all these other donkeys that are turned, but they are still speaking human, and they're all crying. And then he sits his whip like right next to him, and they all stand silent. And he says, you guys have had your trouble, now pay for it." And then you literally don't see them ever again. And that, I don't think there's any Disney movie that's ever done that with so many characters, even though they're not really characters, they're just little ancillary characters in the background, most of these children, but they get taken away and are turned to donkeys and are sold to places like salt mines. I think it said salt mines on one of the crates that they were being thrown in. But they literally just stay donkeys for the rest of their lives. And that is disturbing. That is legitimately disturbing, and I don't think that any Disney movie has done something that creepy with the villain, and the villain has not been resolved. In terms of the animated canon, I don't think so. But that is legitimately terrifying. That still, to this day, watching it ever since I was a kid, that still makes me nervous and just makes me go, wow, this is very ballsy that they did this. But it plays perfectly to the story, in which, for Pinocchio's sake, he's got to be good to become a real boy, and like seeing all this happen is like the consequences. So I do love that they had the balls to actually make it stay dark like that. With all of these dark characters, like they are all really cool villains, especially the last one, whatever his name is. But it is just really fantastic on that note with the villains, and doing that where the villain succeeds and Pinocchio and Jiminy just escape, so they don't know what happens to them, even though we know it's gonna happen to them. But But yeah, that is so fantastic and how dark this movie is. And I love that so much about it. And I just love the story about how Pinocchio, like Geppetto, wishes for a boy, but he doesn't have one. And then he made a puppet that looks like a boy, and then the blue fairy comes down and turns him into a semi-real boy. He's not a boy yet, like fully. He's a puppet that can move and talk. Um, but if he's good, he becomes a real boy. And I like all of these things that he has to go through, Pinocchio, to become a real boy. I think is really a cool story, and just how they have all of these dark threats that really work so well because of how great the villains are and how great the heroes are. Um, and also I'll mention the last villain who's not a human but Monstro. I think that Monstro is a memorable villain too, even though he never speaks. It's just a giant whale. But I like that that's the climax. Like, I haven't read the book Pinocchio or any of the iterations, but I know that the giant whale thing is usually in it. But that is such a great ending to it, with Pinocchio meeting Geppetto and Cleo and Figaro when they're in the boat in the whale, because Geppetto went searching for him because he loved him so much. And I thought that that was touching whenever they meet again, and whenever they fight off this whale, and then Pinocchio dies. Even though he's a puppet, but he dies. Like, and I like how this is the second Disney movie that did the same thing, but in a great way too. It's not like a real copy where like Snow White died in a sleep-like, or is in a sleep-like death in Snow White, and then she comes back because of True Love's kiss. And in this one, Pinocchio dies even though he's a puppet, and he is brought back because of Geppetto's love for him, and how he became a good boy because he sacrificed everything to save Geppetto. I think that's really great that they did it twice and it works well both times. Like, that's really cool. It's just a cool thing I noticed watching these back to back. Just the characters are great, the story's great, it's so intensely dark, the music's great. Give a Little Whistle, When You Wish Upon a Star, I Got No Strings. Like, those are all fantastic Disney songs, and they still are so memorable, like the entire movie is. Um, and Pinocchio is just, again, another fantastic one, and a fantastic second movie for Disney.